The bar at the edge of the station was louder than usual that night, filled with the hum of alien voices, the hiss of translators, and the clink of glass against glass. The nebula's edge was not the kind of place where humans often stayed long. It was old, worn, filled with strange fumes from drinks that glowed in colors most eyes could barely stand, and thick with the kind of stories that never made it into official records. Spacers from across the sectors came here when they wanted to forget their battles or trade rumors they were not supposed to share. Tonight the air buzzed with an uneasy kind of laughter, the kind that carried a hidden edge, as though everyone inside knew danger was not far beyond the hull. When she walked in, no one noticed her at first. A lone human woman, small compared to the towering reptilian merchants and the wide-shouldered soldiers of the Vega clans, slipping past the door with calm steps. She wore a plain jacket, nothing that marked her rank or origin, and carried herself with an ease that suggested she belonged here as much as anyone else. The regulars glanced briefly, then returned to their drinks. Humans had been part of the galactic scene for a short time compared to the ancient races, and while many found them amusing or curious, most did not consider them important. In a place like this, she was just another drifter passing through. She crossed the crowded floor, eyes steady, posture relaxed. The bartender, a creature with 4 arms and translucent skin that shimmered with shifting colors, raised one of its brows when she approached. It had seen hundreds of humans, most of them nervous, overwhelmed, or desperate to fit in. But this one did not look nervous. She looked as though she had already decided something, and the room around her was only background noise. When she reached the counter, she leaned slightly forward and spoke a single order. "I'll have a Black Star Eclipse." For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. The bartender froze, its hands stiff mid-motion. Conversations in the bar faltered. The strange music from the corner continued, but quieter, as though even the instruments could sense something had shifted. The woman's words echoed in the minds of those who had heard them, and with each passing second, the silence thickened. It was not just a drink she had named. It was a code, a ghost pulled from the past, a signal that carried more weight than anyone in the room wanted to believe. The bartender's eyes darkened to a deep crimson, its species sign of fear. It leaned forward slowly, voice almost a whisper. "Do you even know what you have asked for, human?" The woman gave a faint smile, calm, unbothered by the sudden shift in the room. "Of course I do. That's why I ordered it." Around her, heads began to turn. A pair of miners from the outer rings leaned closer, muttering under their breath. At a table near the wall, a squad of armored Vega soldiers straightened, their laughter fading into sharp silence. Even the gamblers at the back paused their game. Cards held in the air, eyes fixed on the bar. The Black Star Eclipse was not a drink anyone asked for casually. It was not written on menus, not listed in any database accessible to the public. It was something whispered about by those who had lived through the wars, a mixture said to mimic the chemical blend used by the old commanders during the Eclipse campaign, a war that most believed had been erased from history. To speak its name was to invite ghosts into the room. The bartender hesitated, then reached for the hidden shelf behind the counter, where bottles older than empires were kept under lock. Its hands trembled slightly as it began to mix the dark, swirling liquid, shades of violet and black, twisting together like smoke trapped in glass. The woman waited, steady, as though the weight of the moment meant nothing to her. To everyone else it was impossible not to stare. A human should not have known this drink existed, let alone dared to order it in front of those who carried its memory like a scar. Finally the glass was placed before her. The liquid shimmered faintly, a reflection of void light that seemed to absorb sound. She lifted it, holding it steady in her hand, and without waiting for permission or explanation, she raised it to her lips and drank. One slow swallow, then another. The silence around her grew absolute. When she set the empty glass back on the counter, she turned her head slightly, her eyes sweeping the room. "You're all wondering the same thing," she said, her voice calm but carrying through the air like a knife through cloth. "How does a human know about this?" The question hung unspoken but real, pressing down on every ear in the bar. The soldiers' eyes narrowed, the gamblers shifted uncomfortably, the miners whispered prayers. Even the bartender dared not move. She stood alone, a single figure at the heart of their fear, and yet she showed no sign of weakness. Her gaze lingered on the soldiers for a heartbeat longer, then returned to her glass. The faintest smile touched her lips again, as though she had planned this moment and had been waiting for it. The truth was simple but terrifying. She knew something no human should know, something that the galaxy itself had tried to forget. And by naming the drink, she had forced every living soul in the room to remember. The nebula's edge was never quiet for long. But on that night, silence stretched until it became unbearable. Something had shifted, not just in the bar, but in the balance of power that had always defined who was predator and who was prey. With one order, the human woman had pulled back the curtain, and the galaxy would never look at her kind the same way again. The silence that followed her words felt heavier than the gravity plating beneath the floor. It was not the silence of boredom or of simple curiosity, but the silence of a crowd realizing that the ground under their feet was not as solid as they believed. Every being inside the nebula's edge carried stories of the old Eclipse campaign. Some whispered, some shouted in drunken rage, but all wrapped in the same cloak of fear. That war was the kind of memory species buried so deep that even their children were told it never happened. The kind of horror that leaders agreed to erase from every archive. Yet here was a human, one of the youngest races to step into the galactic stage, summoning that buried memory as if it were hers to command. At a corner table, a miner named Darrow, his lungs scarred from years of breathing dust storms on broken worlds, leaned toward his companion and muttered that no human should know those words unless someone had told them. And if someone had told them, then perhaps the eclipse was not as distant as they hoped. The companion said nothing, only tightened his grip on the cup in his hands. On the far side of the room, the Vega soldiers rose to their feet, their armor plates clicking softly, the movement slow but deliberate, the kind that made it clear they were preparing to act. Their leader, a scarred veteran known simply as Core, stepped forward, his wide shoulders cutting through the crowd like a blade through mist. His eyes, sharp and pale, locked onto the human woman as though he were staring down an enemy across a battlefield. "You play a dangerous game," he said, his voice low, rumbling like stone dragged over stone. "That name is not for your kind to speak. How do you know it?" The woman turned her gaze toward him, calm, steady, not flinching under the weight of his presence. She did not answer at once, letting the tension stretch thin like a drawn bowstring. Finally she set her glass down and folded her hands on the counter, her voice even and without fear. "I know it," she said, "because I saw what your kind tried to bury. And I saw who bled for it." A murmur ran through the crowd like a wave, rising and falling as every ear caught the meaning of her words. The soldiers stiffened, one of them gripping the handle of his weapon, but Core raised a hand to hold him back. His eyes narrowed. "You claim to have seen the eclipse," he said, his tone heavy with disbelief. "Impossible. Humans were not even Starside when that war was fought." She tilted her head slightly, a trace of a smile at the corner of her lips. "So they told you. But history has more than one version, and some of it never made it into your records. Some of it never could." For the first time unease flickered across the veteran's face, a shadow of something old pressing on his memory. He had fought in enough battles to know when someone was bluffing, and this woman did not sound like a liar. Her words carried weight, not because she shouted them, but because she spoke them with the calm certainty of someone who had nothing to prove. Around them the rest of the bar leaned in, every eye and ear focused, caught between fear and fascination. The bartender tried to break the moment, its voice unsteady. "Human, you should not speak of such things here. The eclipses," it paused, searching for a word that could soften the truth. "The eclipse is forbiddance." The woman's gaze shifted back to her empty glass. "You call it forbiddance. We call it survival." Different words, same scars. Kor's fists clenched at his sides. "Lies," he growled, but the word did not carry the strength it should have. It felt thin, weak, as if even he doubted it. "Your world was quiet then. Your people were children, crawling on their dirt, not standing among stars." Her eyes lifted again, meeting his. "That is what you were told. That is what they wanted you to believe. But the void does not care who is ready and who is not. It comes where it will, and it came to us long before your leaders thought to hide it. We met it alone, and we did not break." A hush fell again. The miners stopped muttering. The gamblers held their breath. Even the music device in the corner seemed to falter, its notes dragging into silence. The idea was too large to dismiss and too dangerous to accept. If what she said was true, then humans had already fought the very thing that had brought older civilizations to the edge of ruin. And if that was true, then humanity was not the naive, reckless species most had dismissed them as. They were something else entirely. Kor took another step closer, his armor brushing against a chair that squealed across the floor. His voice dropped lower, almost a growl. "If what you say is true, then why now? Why speak of it here? Why order the drink of commanders when you could have kept your secret safe?" The woman leaned back slightly, folding her arms as though she were no longer the one being questioned, but the one questioning the room. Her answer came without hesitation. "Because the void stirs again. You can feel it, even if you don't. Admit it, the borders grow thin, the old whispers return. You pretend not to hear them, but we do. Humans have always listened, because we remember what silence means." The words hit the room with the weight of stone. For many, silence was only the pause between sounds, but for those who remembered the eclipse, silence was something else entirely. Silence was the scream of a ship swallowed whole by the dark. Silence was the moment between life and nothing, when a star itself seemed to vanish. The crowd shivered as if the memory touched them anew, though half of them had never lived it. Themselves, memory did not need witnesses. It carried itself in fear. Kor's face hardened, but beneath his anger lay something colder, something like dread. He wanted to call her a liar again, to laugh and dismiss her as another human trying to play bigger than her shadow. But the certainty in her eyes stole the words from his mouth. The woman did not press her advantage. She only lifted her hand, traced the rim of her empty glass, and said softly, "You ask why now? The answer is simple. Because it is starting again, and someone has to speak before you forget what must not be forgotten." No one moved. The silence was total. In the space of a single drink, the room had shifted from laughter and noise to fear, and questions none of them were ready to face. The miners stared at their cups as though answers might rise from the liquid. The gamblers abandoned their game. Even the bartender, who had lived through more wars than most, felt its skin ripple in unease. And at the center of it all sat the human woman, ordinary in appearance, extraordinary in presence, a spark of something larger than anyone wanted to admit. She had spoken words that could not be unsaid, and the air itself seemed to wait for what would come next. The air inside the nebulas edge had grown thick as though the walls themselves leaned closer to hear what would be said next. The crowd, that only an hour earlier was laughing, drinking, and forgetting the day's labor, now sat trapped between silence and dread. Every eye remained on the human woman at the counter, every ear waiting for another word that might either banish the fear or drag it deeper. She had spoken of the eclipse as if it were not just history, but memory, and that alone was enough to unsettle even those who pretended not to care. Kor, the soldier who had confronted her, stood tall with his armored hands clenched into fists. His pride demanded that he silence her, that he strike down the insolence of a species that should have been crawling at the galaxy's feet instead of speaking like an equal. Yet his instincts whispered that striking her down would not erase what she had already planted. His kind had fought enough battles to know when a foe carried truth behind their words. Still he pressed on, his voice a low growl that carried across the hushed room. "Speak then, human. Tell us what you claim to know. Tell us how your kind, who had not yet set foot among the stars, could face the same darkness that bled empires." Dry. The woman turned toward him, her eyes sharp but calm, like someone weighing her words not out of fear, but because each one mattered. She placed her hands flat on the counter, leaned slightly forward, and began. The eclipse was not only your war. It was not only fought at the edges of your empires. The void does not honor borders, and it does not choose its prey by age or by power. It came to our skies when our ships were nothing more than fragile bones of steel. We did not seek it. We did not even understand it, but we bled for it all the same. A shiver ran through the crowd. Some shook their heads in denial, while others leaned closer, unable to resist the pull of her story. The gamblers forgot their game entirely. The miners, who had seen too much of death, nodded as if they understood the shape of her words, even if they had never heard them before. And Kor, though he kept his stance unbroken, felt a weight settle in his chest. She continued, her voice steady, never raised yet filling every corner of the room. "We called it something else, not eclipse. We did not have your words, your records, your commanders to guide us, but we knew its hunger. We saw the light of our stations vanish into nothing. We heard the silence of entire colonies gone in a breath. And when it came for Earth itself, we fought with what little we had. We fought with fire and iron, with desperation and with madness, because surrender was not in us. We lost millions before we learned how to hold the line, but we did hold it. And when the dark pulled back, it left us scarred, but not broken." The bartender's hands trembled as it polished a glass that did not need cleaning. It remembered whispers from old veterans who spoke of human ships that appeared too late to be part of the known alliances, ships that fought with reckless fury against odds that should have destroyed them. Those stories had always been dismissed as drunken fables, the kind spacers invented to give hope where none was deserved. Yet hearing this woman now, those fables no longer sounded like lies. One of the miners, voice rough and hoarse, dared to speak. "If that is true, why keep it hidden? Why not tell the galaxy what you survived?" The woman's eyes shifted toward him, softening for a heartbeat. "Because no one would have believed us. Your empires wanted to forget. Your leaders erased the records, silenced the survivors, buried the truth beneath treaties and lies. To speak then would have been to invite scorn, perhaps war. So we carried it alone. We taught our children not in books but in blood, not in history but in whispers. We remembered in secret so that when the silence came again, we would know what it meant." A long murmur rippled through the bar, disbelief mixing with reluctant recognition. The idea of a species so young bearing such weight in silence was almost unthinkable. And yet, it explained much: the strange resilience of humans, their reckless courage in battles too large for their ships, their refusal to bow even when wisdom demanded retreat. Perhaps they were not reckless at all. Perhaps they were simply remembering. Kor stepped closer, the light glinting off his armor. His voice held less anger now, though no less weight. "You speak as though you were there. You look young even by human measure. How can you claim knowledge of what happened generations before you were born?" The woman's smile returned, faint, almost sad. Because memory does not vanish with death, it runs in blood. It carries through the line. My family was marked by it, as many were. We remember in dreams. We remember in scars passed from parent to child. When I drink the eclipse, I taste not just alcohol but the same mixture they used to sharpen their minds, to steady their hands when the void came for them. I drink to remember, and I drink to remind you that forgetting is the true danger. The room stirred again, half in awe, half in fear. The idea that humans carried memory in their very blood unsettled even the strongest of hearts. Some of the aliens looked at her as if she were not a woman at all, but a vessel of something older, something too vast to fit inside flesh. Others whispered accusations of lies and madness, though their voices trembled as they said it. The truth had a way of seeding itself even in those who tried to deny it. The bartender finally spoke, voice low and heavy. You should not have said these things aloud. You cannot unsay them now. There are those who will kill you for even hinting that the eclipse still stirs. Her gaze returned to her empty glass. Then let them come. Humanity has never hidden from what hunts us. Not then, not now. For a long moment, the crowd only stared at her, caught between fear and fascination. The weight of her words lingered in the air like smoke that could not be cleared. And though no one said it aloud, they all felt the same truth pressing on their chests. If she was right, if the void was indeed stirring again, then the galaxy was not prepared. And perhaps the only species that had been preparing all along was the one they had dismissed as reckless newcomers. Korr took a step back, his face shadowed with thought, the first cracks of doubt showing in the soldier who had once stood unshaken. Around him the bar seemed smaller, darker, as though the memory of the eclipse had already begun to seep back into the present. And at the counter the human woman sat calm and unafraid, her presence a quiet storm that none could ignore. The nebulas. Edge felt smaller with every passing second, as though the walls themselves were leaning inward under the weight of truths that should have stayed buried. The woman's words hung heavy in the air, and no one dared laugh or shrug them off anymore. Some still wanted to call her a liar, but the calm in her eyes, the certainty in her voice, made denial taste hollow. Everyone in the room understood that once the silence of the eclipse returned, denial would not save them. Korr, the soldier who had challenged her, stood still with his jaw tight and his eyes locked on her, as though staring harder might strip away her secrets. He had seen battlefields drenched in fire, comrades cut down in storms of plasma, and still he had never felt the strange mix of fear and respect that now coiled in his chest. He wanted to dismiss her words as human arrogance, but they had sunk too deep already. He had felt the shadow of the eclipse in his youth, and though his leaders told him it was nothing but a ghost, he knew that kind of silence was not the silence of peace. It was the silence of something waiting. The bartender tried once more to break the tension, its voice trembling as it leaned closer to the human. You speak of things that are dangerous. If the wrong ears hear this, you will bring fire down on your people. Why stir fear when fear already sleeps close to the surface? She turned her head slightly, her gaze steady. Because fear only sleeps for so long. It always wakes, and when it does, better to be ready than caught blind. That is why I am here. Her words struck Korr harder than he expected. He stepped forward, his heavy boots scraping across the floor, and stopped just a pace from her stool. You say you are here to warn, to remind us. But you came alone, with no flag, no banner, no fleet behind you. What power does one human carry to make such claims? What proof do you offer that your kind has been preparing and not simply inventing stories to make yourselves look larger than you are? Her smile was small, not mocking but patient, the kind of smile that came from someone who had been asked the same question many times before. She leaned back slightly, her voice carrying across the silent room with ease. The proof is not in ships or in banners. It is in memory and in readiness. Humanity has been waiting for this longer than you know. While you erased your records and buried your scars, we built ours into our bones. Every war we fought since then, every desperate measure, every reckless stand, all of it was practice for what we knew would come again. You see, our chaos is madness, but it is method. It is preparation. The room stirred again, uneasy murmurs rolling through the crowd like ripples across water. Some nodded slowly, as if her words explained things they had always suspected about humans. Others shook their heads in fear, whispering that if this was true, then humanity was not reckless but dangerous, a species carrying a weapon inside their very nature. Kor clenched his fists, his voice hard. You speak like a commander. You speak like one of those who led fleets into the void. But you are only one woman with no rank and no station. Why should any of us believe you stand for humanity at all? She did not flinch. She leaned forward now, her eyes locked onto his with quiet fire. Because the drink I ordered is not just a drink. It is a signal. It is what commanders of the eclipse drank when they knew the void was near, a way of telling one another without words that the time had come to prepare. I did not order it for myself, I ordered it for all of you. The void stirs again, and whether you like it or not, humanity is ready. We have been waiting for this call. The words slammed into the room. Like a hammer. Gasps broke from the crowd, some voices trembling in denial, others silent with dread. The idea that the Black Star eclipse was not just alcohol but a code, a tradition of warriors long dead, gave her presence a weight none could ignore. She had not come to boast. She had come to announce. The bartender's hands shook, a glass slipping from its grip and shattering across the floor. The sound snapped through the silence like a gunshot, but no one moved to clean it. All eyes remained on the human woman, as though she had become the center of gravity in the room. Kor's face hardened, but even his anger could not hide the unease in his eyes. He wanted to believe she was bluffing, but deep down he knew she was not. Too many pieces fit together now. The reckless courage of human soldiers, the strange way their leaders always seemed willing to gamble everything on survival. The stories that surfaced in whispers from old veterans about ships that appeared in the eclipse and vanished again. Finally he spoke, his voice lower now, less certain. If this is true, then what do you want from us? What do you expect we do with this warning? Her expression softened, almost weary. I expect nothing. I came because silence has already lasted too long. I came because when the void moves, hesitation kills faster than any weapon. You can do with my words as you will, believe them or not. Prepare or not. But know this, when the eclipse comes again, humanity will stand ready, and those who forget will fall. The crowd shifted restlessly. Some whispered to each other, fear in their voices. Others stared at her with something closer to respect, a reluctant acknowledgement that she was not speaking from fantasy, but from knowledge carried deep in her blood. Even Kor stood quiet, his pride struggling against the weight of what she had said. Then the woman lifted her empty glass once more and tapped it lightly against the counter. The sound was small, but in the silence it echoed like a bell. One drink, she said softly, to remind the galaxy that humans never come unarmed. The words settled like dust over the stunned crowd. The bar was no longer a place of laughter and drunken boasts. It had become a place where the memory of an old war was reborn, where a single human had dragged buried truth into the light and forced everyone to face it. For the first time that night, even Kor found no answer. He turned his gaze away, his voice caught in his throat, because deep down he knew the void was stirring again. And for the first time, he feared humanity less as a reckless child and more as a rival survivor who might hold the key to the war to come. The nebulas, Edge remained silent long after her words faded into the hum of the old lights. It was the kind of silence that pressed against the chest, heavy and unshakable. No one raised a glass, no one whispered. No one dared move, as if the very air had become sacred with the weight of what had just been spoken. Even Kor, who had entered ready to break a human's pride in front of the crowd, found himself staring at her as though he had been stripped of the armor that pride once gave him. She had turned a simple drink into a declaration that none of them could ignore. The bartender, its hands still trembling, finally gathered the courage to speak. Its voice came out thin, almost pleading. If you are right, if the void is stirring again, if the eclipse waits beyond the rim, then why tell us here in a place where only wanderers and half-drunks gather? Why not bring this message before the council, before admirals and senators? Why bury such a warning in a room of shadows? She turned her eyes toward the bartender, and though her expression was calm, there was something sharp beneath it, something almost sorrowful. Because councils forget, admirals lie, senators trade truth for comfort. The last time this shadow came, it was not leaders who remembered, it was soldiers, it was wanderers. It was people like you who carried memory while the powerful tried to bury it. I do not need the council to listen. I need the living to remember. The answer chilled the room, for deep down many of them knew she was right. Leaders wrote history with clean hands, but it was the broken and the scarred who carried the real stories. Some in the bar bore old wounds from wars no one else admitted happened. Some bore nightmares of places they were told did not exist. And now, hearing her, those wounds ached again, as if the body itself was remembering what the mind had been forced to forget. Kor finally spoke, though his voice was quieter now, stripped of the sharp edge it carried before. If what you say is true, then humanity has carried a secret war inside it, while the rest of us played at peace. Tell me, human, why would your kind bear such a burden alone? Why not share it? Why not demand the rest of us prepare? She held his gaze for a long moment, then answered slowly, her words carrying the weight of centuries. Because no one would believe. When we warned before, you called us mad. When we fought before, you said we sought chaos for its own sake. You could not see that we were not fighting for glory or for conquest, but because we remembered what silence truly means, so we stopped asking for belief. We prepared alone. That was our curse and our strength. Her words carried no anger, only truth, and that truth stung sharper than any insult. Kor's hands unclenched, and for the first time he bowed his head, not in defeat, but in acknowledgement. He had mocked humans for their reckless nature, but now he understood that recklessness was not madness, it was readiness, the only way a fragile species had survived the weight of shadows no one else dared name. The crowd began to shift again, no longer restless but heavy with thought. A lizard-like merchant muttered that he would not sleep that night. A scarred miner whispered that the silence in his dreams finally made sense. Even the youngest among them felt a strange fear that was not only fear of death, but fear of forgotten truth. Humanity had not come to boast. Humanity had come to remind. The woman placed her glass down, the faint sound echoing once more through the still room. You do not need to trust humanity. You do not need to follow us. But when the void comes, and it will, you will remember. This night. And you will know that the first warning came not from your leaders, but from a human who carried memory like a weapon. She rose from her stool, her movements calm but certain. The crowd parted without a word, their eyes following her as though she were both a messenger and a ghost. Even Kor stepped aside, his head lowering slightly in respect he would never have imagined offering an hour earlier. She did not smile. She did not boast. She simply walked toward the door with the quiet strength of one who had fulfilled her purpose. At the threshold, she stopped and turned once more, her voice soft but carrying through the air with the weight of iron. The eclipse is not just silence. It is hunger, it is patience, and it is moving again. Prepare or do not, but when the stars go quiet, you will know humanity spoke first. With that she stepped into the corridor beyond, her figure fading into the shadows of the station until only her words remained echoing in their minds. The door closed, and the nebula's edge was left in stillness, so thick it seemed even the air was listening. For a long time no one moved. Then slowly, one by one, they lifted their glasses, not in celebration, but in something heavier, something closer to ritual. The bartender poured the dark drink again, its hand steady now, and without needing instruction, each of them raised the glass high. They did not drink for taste. They drank for memory. Korr was the last to raise his glass. His voice was low, almost reverent. To the ones who remember, to the ones who wait. The glasses clinked together softly, the sound fragile yet eternal. In that moment, the bar became more than a place of wandering souls. It became the first council of memory, a place where truth had been spoken again after being buried for too long. They knew not all would believe them, not all would prepare, but they also knew something had shifted. When the human woman vanished into the corridors, she carried with her the weight of silence and the strength of survival. But what she left behind was more powerful still. She had planted fear, yes, but also respect, and beneath both of those she had planted memory. And memory is the one weapon that never rusts. Far beyond the station, in the cold dark where no sun reached, something stirred. A silence deeper than any space, older than any war, opened its eyes once more. The void was moving, patient and slow, and it cared nothing for councils or banners. But for the first time in ages, whispers of its coming spread like sparks among the forgotten, and among them burned brightest the promise of humanity, a species too stubborn to forget, too reckless to surrender, too scarred to ever come unarmed. The nebula's edge never returned to its old noise again. Every laugh carried a shadow, every song carried an edge, and every glass of the eclipse drink became more than a drink. It became a vow, and somewhere in the vast night, the silence listened. End.